Now, how much sugar do we actually eat in this country? First sugar refinery was created back here in New York City, actually in 1689. 10 years later, the sugar consumption per person per year was about 4 pounds. By the turn of the last century, so we're talking 1999, it was up to 158 pounds per person a year. That's the average. So if you don't eat a lot of sugar and you don't think you're eating 158 pounds, think about all the different items that you might eat that have sugar in it, number one. And number two, other people might be eating a whole lot more. So that number is an average. Now, by comparison, the average broccoli consumption in the United States last year was 8 pounds per person per year. Okay? So that gives you a kind of an idea of how readily available sugar is, how ingrained it is into our lives, and how easy it is to OD on it all the time if it's just part of your regular diet. This is a very important chart because it talks about what happens in your body when you eat sugar. Now, everyone is probably familiar with the sugar rush and the sugar crash, but I want to go a little deeper and talk about what's actually going on with your blood and how these conditions that have become, headline news everywhere in our country have taken made such a strong foothold. Now, since sugar craving is your body's request for energy in the moment. Glucose is the form of blood sugar that is the fuel your body uses to function. Just like gas in a car or electricity in a generator, we absolutely need glucose to live. But it makes a huge difference how fast and what form that glucose enters your body. And that all depends on the type and quality of carbohydrate, i.e. glucose, or everything but protein or fat that make up the majority of your diet. Now, there are two kinds of carbs, simple carbs and complex carbs. And they all contain sugar in one form or another, but depending on their chemical structures, or nutritional value, your body processes them completely differently. So, look at the chart above, and let me just give an example. So you wake up late for work one morning and have a cup of coffee or a glass of fruit juice on an empty stomach, and then you grab a muffin, bagel, donut, croissant, piece of toast, what have you, some kind of bread product, and you're out the door on the way to work. Now, the coffee is a stimulant. It's going to cause your adrenal glands to pump out adrenaline into your bloodstream for your body to use as energy until it can convert some of those simple carbs in the form of the sugar from the coffee, but the fruit juice or the muffin or the bagel has the glucose in it. It's refined white flour. It's broken down very quickly in your system. Because these foods are all highly processed, they contain short chains of sugar molecules. And these are broken down swiftly, entering your bloodstream, rapidly causing a spike in your blood sugar, or what is known as a sugar rush. Sudden glut of glucose causes your body to kick into an emergency state. It pumps out insulin from your pancreas to burn up the excess glucose and transport that into your cells, which result in a sudden dip or crash in your blood sugar. So that zigzag blue line here on the screen is kind of indicative of what actually is going on inside your body when you eat sugar in this way. First thing in the morning, on an empty stomach, you have coffee, you have something to kind of hold you over. Mid-morning, you're starting to drag, and then most people start that cycle all over again. They might get something else to tie them over until lunch. And at lunch, they may have a soda, and so the process goes on throughout the day. So by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you're back down here, crashing again, looking for something to pump you up. Now, if this sounds and feels familiar, it's because this up and down yo-yo effect affects close to 25% of the population. The condition is really known as hypoglycemia, and it's your body's inability to regulate large amounts of simple carbs, processed foods, and refined sugars when they enter your bloodstream. So you're on this roller coaster yo-yo trip all day. So simple carbs are fast-acting carbs, all white flour products, all refined sugar products, including high fructose corn syrup, fruit juices, ice cream, and so forth. By contrast, if you take the same scenario and you ate a bowl of whole grain oats, millet, quinoa, or some kind of whole grain sweetened with maple syrup or a little honey, sliced bananas, apples, pears, or kind of fruit topping, whatever you choose, strawberries, you would have a very different morning energetically. These foods are complex carbohydrates composed of long chains of sugar which are bound within the fiber of the food's flesh. Your body has to break down the fruit fiber and the whole grain fiber before the sugar can be released and converted to glucose. Time makes all the difference here. Because this process is slow, your pancreas can take its time secreting the insulin because there's no emergency. It's not in an emergency state at this point. There's no rush to burn up the excessive amounts of glucose because blood sugar levels are rising steadily over a number of hours as opposed to minutes as indicated by the slowly rising red line in the chart. Examples of complex carbs, They're slow-acting, are whole grains, oats, millets, quinoa, whole fruits, whole veggies, leafy greens, beans, and legumes. The more processed a carb is, the faster it enters your bloodstream, causing a spike and resulting crash in your blood sugar, or the condition known as hypoglycemia. I'm just going to focus on what I feel are the most ones of major concern for the most people right now. And they are hypoglycemia, which I just described, obesity, insulin resistance, and type 2 diabetes. Now, it's basically a slippery slope. When you eat a diet overloaded with simple carbs, which cause a hypoglycemic spike and crash of blood sugar, your body is literally in a constant state of emergency. Potato chips, crackers, Fritos are all simple carbs. This continues. Eventually your cells, which need insulin to convert those simple carbs into glucose, become desensitized to the insulin your pancreas is making. This is known as insulin resistance. This is where your blood glucose levels are less affected by insulin, which opens the door for all kinds of other problems and disorders to start showing up in your body. Now, if this keeps going over time and you don't change your diet and you don't address this, the excess glucose not burned up by insulin, exercise, or other metabolic functions get stored as body fat, especially in the adipose tissue of your belly, your back, your hips, and your thighs. Now, obesity is one of the determining factors in diagnosing a collection of disorders known as metabolic syndrome, or more affectionately called Syndrome X. Now, you may have heard about this as well. It's kind of a thing that doctors can't really put their finger on, but they know that you have elevated resting insulin levels in your blood, which then shows them that there's something going on with the insulin and the glucose relationship, that your cells are not actually transporting that glucose into your cells. It's not actually staying on the outside. Syndrome X includes, but is not limited to, obesity, high blood pressure, high triglycerides, and high cholesterol. So it's higher of the bad type of cholesterol and lower of the good type of cholesterol. So any combination of these four factors will lead you to have this diagnosis called metabolic syndrome or Syndrome X. And this can happen from eating a lot of say that word, Jason, refined, processed foods, whether they be bread, flour products, or the processed sugar itself. And soda is included. Now, Syndrome X very often leads, and Syndrome X is pretty much being a pre-diabetic person. Syndrome X very often leads to the diagnosis of type 2 diabetes, where essentially your cells become immune to the insulin that your pancreas makes. So no glucose can actually get to the cells and feed them. It's more complex than that, obviously, but essentially this is what happens. It's happened to millions of people in our country, and it's continuing to grow because they've been eating and drinking excessive amounts of sugar in the form of empty, nutrient-deficient calories over the course of their lives. Okay, so let's just sum this up real quick before we move to agave and then to some solutions that will get you off of sugar. All added sugars are in processed foods. Sugar has many different forms and names. The average American eats between 110 and 150 pounds of sugar a year. Simple carbs and complex carbs affect our blood differently. Hypoglycemia can lead to major health problems, which I just described as Syndrome X, insulin resistance, and then type 2 diabetes. Here we are at Agave Nectar. And since we get to choose what we eat, it's important to have as much clarity about the type of sugar that we're going to eat. I, for one, do everything I can to avoid products with high fructose corn syrup because the research has shown it can be detrimental to my health in so many ways. And so much so that the corn growers lobby has attempted to rebrand high fructose corn syrup as corn sugar. I don't know if you've seen these ads lately, but it's just another socially acceptable sweetener like Agave Nectar, perhaps. Okay, Agave Nectar has really become the darling of the alternative health movement. I know that other health counselors and people who actually teach at the institute where I got my training are still touting that Agave Nectar is, harmless for you, low glycemic, and a really healthy alternative to table sugar. And I have to say that I disagree. I disagree wholeheartedly. And I've done some research, and the research is pretty damning. So just hear me out if you disagree or you're curious to find out more, because I'm going to really break this down. I read an article, like I was saying, in the New York Times called "Is Sugar Toxic?" And the author weighed the documented evidence on the effect of refined sugars and whether or not this evidence was damaging enough to justify defining sugar as a toxic substance along the lines of pesticides, lead paint, or mercury in fish. And when you consider a child's birthday cake or a tall glass of lemonade on a hot summer's day, it's hard to see any inherent danger. However, Where did this cultural norm of having a birthday cake come from? Was it based on some ancient ritual, or was it advertising and marketing? And according to the research done by the author Gary Taubes in the New York Times article, in the early 1980s, high fructose corn syrup replaced sugar in sodas and other products in part because refined sugar then had the reputation as being a generally noxious nutrient. So, sugar had a bad reputation, so then they said high fructose corn syrup is the healthy alternative to sugar in the 1980s. Okay, I was born in the 60s. I was a teenager in the 80s. I don't remember any of this. So if anybody dates me in age, maybe perhaps they remember this. But high fructose corn syrup was then portrayed by the food industry as the healthful alternative, and that's how we, the public, perceived it. Well, isn't that interesting that now, and there's one more part, is that since high fructose corn syrup was cheaper to produce than sugar, it quickly became the additive sweetener of choice for millions of processed food products. Okay, fast forward to today, and now the tide is rolling back, of course, and refined sugar now is being suggested, literally suggested by people, as being a helpful alternative to the now detrimental high fructose corn syrups. That's pretty interesting. I'd say, who's zooming who here? You know, what's the truth? So what does it have to do with agave nectar? Well, listen, the marketing brains behind agave nectar have conjured up this image of native peoples cultivating this ancient sweetener from deep within the jungles of some remote part of Mexico or South Africa where it's also grown. Now, while it's true that native Mexicans make a sweetener from the agave plant, actually from the sap, it's called miel de agave, and it's made by boiling the agave sap for hours until it concentrates into a syrup-like consistency, much like maple syrup. Batches of miel de agave are limited in quantity and therefore expensive to make and use for commercial production. Okay, which is fine, but because the substances that's being produced, labeled, packaged, and sold as agave nectar comes from a completely different part of the agave plant altogether. It comes from the root, the starchy pineapple-like root, which is the principal constituent. Excuse me, I'm getting excited. The principal constituent of the agave root is starch, similar to corn or rice, and it's a complex carbohydrate called inulin, which is made up of chains of fructose. This process by which agave glucose and inulin are converted to nectar is very similar to the process by which cornstarch is converted to high fructose corn syrup. Okay. So what that means is agave starch is subject to the same enzymatic chemical processes that convert starch into a fructose-rich syrup, anywhere from 70% fructose and higher, according to agave nectar chemical profiles posted on agave nectar websites. By contrast, the fructose content of high fructose corn syrup is roughly 55%, is what they use in most sweeteners. So we're talking almost twice, two-thirds more or higher of fructose content in agave nectar. Now, what's the deal with fructose, right? You'd be asking. Okay, we're going to get to that. Let's go a little further. This is somebody who is within the food and beverage industry. Russ Bianchi, he's a managing director and CEO of ADEP Solutions, which is a globally recognized food and beverage development company responsible for the now-near ubiquitous presence of agave nectar in our culture. It says this about the similarities between agave and high fructose corn syrups. Okay, they're indeed made the same way, using a highly chemical process with genetically modified enzymes that are also using caustic acids, clarifiers, filtration, chemicals, and so forth, in the conversion of agave starches into highly refined fructose inulin that is even higher in fructose content than high fructose corn syrup. So if we know what high fructose corn syrup does to us, in terms of what it does to our bodies, causing this obesity epidemic and this type 2 diabetes epidemic, what will be happening when we start to reach a tipping point with people consuming so much agave nectar with an even higher fructose content in it? So I just want you guys to realize that this could be another, even a higher level of epidemic here. Now here's the thing. But you might be thinking, what about the fact that agave nectar has a low glycemic index, which is what you heard, and it is true, it does have a low glycemic index, or that fructose is a natural fruit sugar, so are we not supposed to eat fruit? When a study conducted by the Journal of Clinical Investigation highlights the following facts. Refined fructose lacks amino acids, vitamins, minerals, pectin. It's refined. It doesn't have anything in it. As a result, the body doesn't recognize the refined fructose. Levulose, on the other hand, is a naturally occurring in fruits, and it's not isolated but bound to other naturally occurring sugars within the flesh of the fruit that you're eating. Unlike man-made fructose, levulose contains enzymes, vitamins, minerals, fiber, and fruit pectin. Refined fructose is processed in the body through the liver rather than digested in the intestine, which is why it does not spike your insulin or cause that's why it doesn't cause your insulin to spike, because it's not processed in your small intestine. It's processed in your liver the same way alcohol is. And when it's processed in your liver has a metabolic reaction to it, but it doesn't spike your insulin in that way, in the very same way, which is why it can be considered a low glycemic food. So, because of its high concentration of fructose, like I said, I was just saying that it's metabolized in your liver, and your liver converts this glucose into triglycerides, which are stored as body fat. Now, anybody who's had a cholesterol test will also find out what their triglyceride count is, because it's a very good indicator of high cholesterol and then a pre-indicator of heart disease. It's one of the main reasons why agave has been deemed safe for diabetics, is because, again, it doesn't spike your blood sugar and trigger your pancreas to react and then go down that slippery slope of insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, and then type 2 diabetes. However, in addition to being metabolized in your liver and causing it to store it as triglycerides, which is body fat, high fructose concentration of agave nectar has also been found to depress levels of the hormone leptin. Now, if you don't know what that is, that's okay, but leptin is the hormone that tells your body when to stop eating when you're full. Okay? So if you don't have this hormone functioning properly, you could overeat. Depressed leptin levels can lead to overeating and obesity, which you already know is a contributing factor to insulin resistance, syndrome X, and type 2 diabetes. So even though it might be safe for people who are concerned about their blood sugar by eating agave, in a roundabout way, you still may possibly, more than likely, end up at the same place because of the way this substance is processed in your body. Okay, so the marketing behind agave has touted it as being healthy and the alternative. Nectar sounds like something that's from the gods. Okay, however, in reality, the fructose is fructose, and when it's concentrated fructose, just like in high fructose corn syrup, the agave nectar does damage in your body that contributes to the currently, the current epidemic that we're having with people when it comes to sugar and their weight and what's going on with diabetes. Okay. Now, this information, especially the history of high fructose corn syrup going from being good for you as a replacement for sugar to now being totally bad for you, plus the strange ache that I was getting on my right side when I was consuming agave nectar like it was going out of style because I thought it was really good for me, and this was actually earlier this year, just a few months ago, is the reason why I chose to stop using agave nectar. There's just too much damaging evidence in my opinion. I just want to share this with you. You choose to do what you like, but I just want you to have the information. I have the sources below all the quotes I've made, so you can check out these websites for yourself and find out for yourself. I chose not to do it. I know many of my colleagues and people in the health and wellness industry who swear by agave nectar and would say that I'm talking out of the side of my neck, but I really don't care because they may not have the same information that I have. And maybe they don't, maybe they do, and they just don't care. I just want to make sure that you have as much information as possible so you can make an informed decision whatever you decide to do going forward. So, to sum up, agave is not traditional. It's highly refined. It's more concentrated fructose and high fructose corn syrup. It is not a natural sweetener, and it does contribute to obesity, high cholesterol, and liver damage. So, that's the trouble with agave.